Okay, so let's go to Q&A session. And again, that is, let me find it here. Option Y on Mac or Alt Y on Windows. Option Y on Mac or Alt Y on Windows to raise your hand with questions. And let me see. Mike Brace. Sir, would you like to go? Okay, there we go.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah. And could I trouble you to turn your camera on, Mike?
I'm working on that now.
Wonderful. Thank you, sir.
Fascinating discussion, David. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
I'm heavily involved with the theories of gravity, anti-gravity myself. My only question is it in listening to what your father discovered, it sounds like he negated gravity, but in order to provide thrust in some direction, it does not sound like he provided any means of generating. You know, an anti-gravitational force will just simply negate the gravitational force between two objects, thereby rendering the object, like you said, not so much massless, but weightless. But then how does he use that? How do you propose using that to provide actual propulsion beyond?
Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. How does he? Well, he used to say that once you've negated the weight and the inertial mass of the vehicle, a very small amount of propulsion goes a long way. And with the shuttlecraft that operate within the Earth's atmosphere, he suspected that it was, they were bouncing off of the Earth's magnetic field. And when you look at Bob Lazar's design for the sport model saucer, I'm sure you're familiar with that. If not, I can describe it quickly. Bob Lazar's sport model saucer. You essentially had a circular disc, and in the bottom of the hull, you had what Bob Lazar referred to as negative gravity or gravity wave B cylinders that were projecting gravity, anti-gravity towards the Earth and then repelling off of it. My dad took a look at that and said, more likely they are electromagnets that are repelling off of the Earth's magnetic field. But once you have a weightless vehicle, you can use rockets, you can use magnets, and incidentally, the object would fly like a bat out of hell if with the force of a magnet that large interacting with the Earth's magnetic field. Or you could have in space where you don't have a magnetic field, you can use the gravitational fields of nearby objects. Like you want to go to Mars, you home in on Mars, you increase the force of gravity in that direction and decrease it behind your craft, and you will start flying towards Mars at an ever accelerating rate with no limit to how much acceleration you can manage. Of course, you do have to slow down at the end of the trip, but there are a variety of propulsion methods. There is no method, however, that uses the force of gravity in any other way than I just described, because the one thing about gravity that we observe all throughout the universe is that it is only an attractive force. And when Bob Lazar talks about a gravity B wave, I get very suspicious that he's been fed disinformation to spread around to people who might be looking for a way to build something like the sport model saucer. And this would mislead them about the way it really worked. Does that answer your question? I hope.
Yes, sir, it does. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
My dad used to say, when the movie The Yellow Submarine came out, he said you could sit in a bathtub and put a can of hairspray out the back and fly to the moon on one can of hairspray. And I did some calculations for my other book, The Top 10 UFO Riddles. No, actually it was for both books. about a terrestrial private UAP that could be built by Detroit Auto Works. And it could fly coast to coast on something like 3 gallons of petrol, of diesel fuel, used in a turbojet that would be mounted on the rear of the semicircular disc. And this may be disappointing in terms of high technology, but the conquest of gravity is something that's never been done before. It is a evolutionary step forward in technology, and there will be all kinds of unexpected technological outgrowths from that model of technology on how to control gravitation. And turbine rockets are, I mean, you could use a 1.5 horsepower rocket or even less to propel this vehicle coast to coast. Or say you wanted to live in Colorado and commute to San Francisco, you could do it in an hour or less, the way you use an automobile now with this particular design. Going into space, however, would be another matter altogether. You need special kinds of equipment to go into space. But I'm proposing overhauling the auto industry completely and putting private aircraft in the hands of ordinary citizens on a massive scale, so that we can extend the distances we live from cities. And you can imagine how that might reshape the cultural landscape, something like that, decentralization of populations, taking the pressure off the cities. So rather than rant on about that, if you have any other questions, I'd be glad to answer.
Well, that's good, sir. Thank you very much for answering my question. I appreciate it.
Okay.
And thank you as well. Let me go to Jared next. Jared, go for it, sir.
Hey, sir. I have some peripheral tertiary questions around your dad's work. So it looks like he worked for Lockheed and Boeing at different times in his career, and he had some other papers about NDI, non-destructive interference type testing. And I was just wondering if you could, if you happen to have any of his other work, his maybe not his anti-gravity stuff, but all of his stuff, as well as maybe provide a timeline on when he worked for which companies.
Yes, I have all of that. And in preparation for a question like this, I opened one of the books here. I believe it's the gravity control book. And let me see if I can pull that up. Well, let's see. It's I'm trying to search on CV. Should have a better search term than that.
And yeah, and David, you can do, if you want, you can do a screen share also.
I can? Oh,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know how to do that.
Okay. It is down. Actually, there should be a green button down in the bottom center of your Zoom window.
Oh, okay. Right. I see I have a choice of things to share here.
Yeah, it'll let you share different windows. And if you're doing a browser, if you want to share that, you could just share that way, and you can always stop and reshare later.
Okay, the basic is a whiteboard, an iPhone pad, the screen. I don't know which of, okay, wait a minute, I got it.
There you go.
Here it is. Okay, can people actually see this?
Yeah. And so it's showing, let me see, Al's Grav Control Final in LibreOffice Writer.
Yeah, here's Fred's biography. I want his CV. Oh, that's not what I want. This is the text that I used for publishing the book that's online. These are his degrees. And here's the CV. And these are publications that these are all refereed journal type publications. I don't know how you're going to, you can write to me at info@claffrackner.com and I will send you a copy of this if you want, or you could buy the book, in which case you would automatically get this. But you could see that he was publishing in the field of infrared non-destructive testing, because actually he was the guy who invented that in the 60s. And then he began working on heat transference in objects based on optical principles. That was totally original. And he was also working on what's called the Sommerfeld method, which is a method for analyzing radiation diffraction from objects of a complex shape, like I say, a snowflake. And there was no method for doing that until he wrote this book. The book's behind me. Let's see. This book is also on YouTube. It is extreme. I'm sorry, book is also on Amazon. And it's published by the SPIE, the Optical Society of America. And if I opened it for you, you'd understand why so few people ever heard of my dad's work during his lifetime. He didn't generally speak in broad speculative terms. He spoke in the language of mathematics. And some of the mathematics is extremely difficult. The theory behind it, however, is simple, and that's what I wanted to convey in my little speech. Let's see, what do I have here? Okay, here are all his papers on gravitation. And the MUFON journal was receptive to publishing this stuff, starting with see, where's the first MUFON? Let me make this a little bigger so people could see it better. Oh, here it is, down here. And move this, yeah. Can you actually see a full line of print?
It looks so. It looks like it's wrapping, which you want. Yeah, so yeah, it is bigger.
Okay, yeah, this is a full line from the book. So here's the first paper that had to do with gravitation, and that was in 1960. This is the Air Force Survey 1B, Soviet Research on Gravitation and Analysis of Published Literature. That's also online. This is the 1981 paper. I don't know if anybody's posted it online. I know that the AIAA charges a fee for it. I don't get any of that. That's strictly the AIAA. And I didn't want to put it out there because I was afraid that I'd conflict with their copyright. So here is the first paper from the MUFON journal, the UFO propulsion model. And then comes, well, these are scientific papers. They were published in Physics Essays. That's the first of them. That was the Unified Field Theory paper. This is a Charles Yost interview. Charles Yost, the late Charles Yost, was the publisher of the Electric Spacecraft Journal. And it was, he did a review of Fred's work at the time. I just want to say that you won't find Fred ever saying that he had positively conquered gravitation. There was a negative review on Amazon.com by a guy named Prushi, who was highly critical of the experiment because there was one adverse trial, in the experiment. And a plausible explanation for what happened there has come about through Mark Sokol's work. Because he's using exactly the same electromagnet. It might even be the same, the same one that Fred used in his experiment for Mark's experiments. And it when you switch off the power to the electromagnet, it retains a very large residual field. If they ran the experimental trial immediately after switching off the power, then it's quite possible that this residual field affected the results. The sample in the experiment was only 1.15 grams. And here you have a magnet powerful enough to use in a, what's the word, magnetic resonance device. It's extremely powerful. And so it's unclear. And the thrust of my book, Gravity Control with Present Technology, is to get somebody to repeat the 1994 experiments because they were promising, not because they absolutely proved that this technology works, but because they were strongly suggestive that it did work. And that's pretty good, actually, in a field where it's very difficult to find publicly repeatable experiments. Such as this. You often see pictures of things made to float in cages, but when investigators go out to talk to the people who've run these experiments, they have trouble replicating it. And it's just, in terms of the scientific method, you have to have something that scientists anywhere in the globe could take. They could rebuild the equipment, rebuild the circumstances, run the experiment and get the same results. And that was the criteria my dad used. And unfortunately, the experiment, which was kind of jerry-rigged, using equipment from the chemistry lab at a major Pacific Northwest university, had to be run under the most difficult of circumstances. It wasn't the greatest of circumstances, but he got positive results in every trial except that one. And that one is equivocal. He gives a number of explanations for why you might have gotten the effect when the magnetic field was turned off. And that's why it needs to be run again. You need to control every variable in the experiment and then run it. Okay, so let's see what else we have here. UFOs and crop circles. This is a really good one. I know it was online. It's probably still online. If you could see the date of this article, it was the MUFON Journal number 435, July 2004. And I gave a web address for it. I don't know if that web address is still good, but you could read about how you could actually run an experiment to create crop circles using the same technology. And it would be a good deal cheaper to run than an anti-gravity experiment or a gravity control experiment. And the rest of these papers are really on its unified field theory.
Could you try centering your page in the middle of that window so
sure,
we don't lose the end of it? If you scroll at the bottom, I think just slightly.
Scroll. Oh, okay. Like this?
Yes.
How about like this? Seems
Perfect.
fairly centered. From my standpoint, I can't see what you're seeing.
I think we see exactly what you see within your window.
Oh, okay. Now, are you having trouble reading it? Do you want me to do anything else, like make it bigger?
You know, if there is a way, or maybe a reading view might help if you're able to do that, but that's not, I didn't want you to get kind of turned around with the software.
Okay.
Oh, that's better.
Okay, yeah. So I guess you can do a screen capture of this if you want to. And I can do that with any page from the book. I'll scroll down to the next couple of entries here. And by the way, if I scroll too fast or you want to capture any part of this, just throw a red flag down and I'll go back. And so I'm going to scroll onward. Okay. And I will continue onward now. You know, we're scrolling by decades of work here as it reduced to print, black and white print. It doesn't quite convey the agonies that he went through to get all of this stuff out and published. He met a lot of resistance at physics essays, for example. And I have a few of his retorts to referees. I've never published them because they're contentious, but referees raised objections. I read the objections, and it's a very weird phenomenon psychologically when you find people who are committed heart and soul to the general theory of relativity. The objections they were raising to my father's theory were just random sniping. For example, one was about him using a plus sign where he should have used a negative sign in an equation. It was a typo. But that was the whole reason this referee rejected the paper. Also, I sat down with a Nobel Prize nominee in Palo Alto to talk to him about my dad's work. He took the paper, he kept it for 3 weeks. I asked him about it again. He took the paper out of his briefcase and threw it at me and said he didn't have to read this paper. I said, why not? Because it's bullshit. And then he shouted just like that. And he was turning red in the face and veins popping out of his head. I was really worried he was going to have a heart attack right there. But I said, okay, so it's bullshit. What's bullshit about it? He said, violates the second law of thermodynamics. Ask your dad about that one and get back to me. Well, I did. And my dad destroyed his criticism in about 2 sentences. And if you want to know exactly what he said, it had to do with, well, your friend, the Nobel Prize nominee, would be right if he was talking about a closed system. But we're not talking about a closed system. We're talking about an open system. I quick ran to the internet and looked up the second law of thermodynamics, and it said it applies only to closed systems. So this guy did not know what he was talking about. And I tried to get back to him with the answer, but he refused to talk to me. This is the kind of thing, this petulance is exactly what he ran into and I ran into year after year after year. And it isn't an attempt to suppress my father's work at all. I would not call it that. I would call it just institutional inertia. People do not want to move out of their comfort zone to look at something that might actually undermine things that they've used to, things on which their career is based. And that's a very understandable prejudice. And I think it operates at a subconscious level. But unfortunately, it's standing in the way of progress if this is right, if what he's written is correct. Which, by the way, is another reason I appreciate Mark not getting hung up on that and going straight to the experiment. Okay, so now let's look at the last of the entries. You can look at you can go on vixra.org for this particular paper, but the paper, I reproduced it and I edited it against the original text in his paper when I put it in the book. So I think the best version of it is actually in the book. And in this paper, he's talking about dark matter and resolving the problem of dark matter in the cosmology. based on his theory. So you can see it's a very wide-ranging theory, not limited to gravitation. In fact, he said gravitation and gravity control are really a small part of it. And it's a much bigger subject area than just gravity. But gravity control is obviously the most exciting area because it means opening the space frontier. Now, is there anything else you want to see in here? I'd be glad to put it on the screen.
You know, if you're able to put up your dad's book, Gravity Control Present Technologies, I mean, I think that's some of what you put up, right? But
I put it up, but I don't have.
Maybe you could show us the Amazon listing and stuff like that for it. That was what I was kind of thinking.
The Amazon listing?
Yeah,
sure. Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah, it's up to you, you know, and we're ahead of schedule. So, you know.
Okay, let me open a new browser.
But I believe Ted is with us also. So yeah, it looks like he is here. So that's also, it's okay to be ahead of schedule. You know, I don't want to keep you longer than you need to be here. But I do have 2 questions as well.
Okay, good. You know, I deliberately kept my presentation down so that I could field more questions. As I recall, last time I didn't. The time for questions was limited, and I wanted to answer all questions that I could. For instance, I've got 10 UFO riddles. I've got the solution to 10 UFO riddles here that I can discuss. I'll list the riddles. And if anybody votes, they want to hear the answer, I'd be glad to explain them. For example, why are flying saucers saucers? Or why is that a preferred element of design, the saucer shape? Fred's theory gives the explanation for that. The other one being the instant accelerations, he can explain that. The falling let me see. Has everybody seen the Amazon listing? Because I'd like to bring up the top 10 UFO riddles.
Yeah, I would say bring it up so that people could see it.
Okay. Yeah, just go for Alzofon gravity control with present technology. You'll find it on. It's obviously the only one there.
Okay.
Fact,
Well,
I don't think there are too many Alzofons in the.
Do you want me to stop your screen share then, and we can go to questions? We can go back to questions, or?
Sure. Riddle 1: why is the saucer shape so popular? And what's holding them up?
Oh, yeah, you know, David, it's not showing it. Actually, it's stuck on your document. I think that's the problem. Here, let me stop your screen share. Let me see. Stop sharing. There we go. Okay. Sorry. Yeah, because you shared the document, and so when you brought the other one up, it's not showing it. But if it's okay, let me go to questions really quick first. Let me go to Bill Alec, who has been patiently waiting.
Thank you, Tim. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound great, Bill.
Yeah, David, interesting lecture here. Personally, I'm doing a lot of work with Tom Bearden's scalar wave technology. And what that is, the long and short of it is that Tom describes matter as trapped electromagnetism, which means that you have converging fields that make up matter. And when you have these converging fields, you get something that's, you know, for example, if you have a sine wave, you have with these converging fields, you have a sine squared term. And the sine squared term only pops up with the original Maxwell equations, not the new ones edited by Oliver Heaviside, but the original work done by Maxwell, which includes a scalar component. Now, I replicated Tom's work. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, the guy's absolutely right. Okay, it's producing a scalar wave, which is a sine squared term of converging fields. And when you look at it on the scope, you can actually see this on the scope. And I can show this on the, I'm not sure if you can see it here.
It's actually,
It's probably not showing up very well.
it becomes transparent and I can see the picture behind you. Now I can see it.
Yeah.
EMWH.
Classical electromagnetism, it just works with AC waves. But when you work with the sine squared term, it's an AC wave that's offset, that has a DC offset. Okay. And that seems to be the key point of the scalar mechanics, because what Tom is actually describing is a gravitational wave. This is how you make gravity waves using the sine squared term. And to do it, you set up these converging fields. They have to be either in phase for gravity or out of phase, okay, perfectly out of phase for anti-gravity. Now, I was wondering if your father worked with converging fields in maybe an anti-gravity configuration where they're perfectly out of phase. Now, the other experiments that I worked on is the Boyd-Bushman experiment, where you set up these opposing fields on magnets and you force them together and you do this drop test and it produces an anti-gravitational effect. And I was wondering if maybe your father has worked with anything with converging fields, okay, to produce either gravity or anti-gravitational effects.
No, and I would go back to the theoretical basis of his technology to point out that it's a requirement that you have a kind of operational definition of gravity to begin with, or you will not know what levers to pull in nature to create a modification of the gravitational field. Now, whatever model you have, it must explain why, for example, the gravitational field there's no shields against it. You can't put a metal screen between you and the earth and
right. Well,
shield
it
yourself.
penetrates everything.
It penetrates everything.
Right.
That immediately suggests that it has to do with elementary processes or elementary particles, because that's the one property that is shared by all kinds of masses, no matter how hot or how cold. They all exhibit gravitation in exactly the same formula. You don't, for example, find a planet made of nickel or one of the asteroids that has any different kind of a gravitational field than an equal mass made of some other kind of material. Material has nothing to do with it. It's simply a function of mass. So your theoretical basis has to be able to explain all those things. I can't comment on the scalar wave idea because I'm not familiar with it enough. Also, I'm no great shakes as a physicist. All I'm familiar with is the reasoning process by which my dad was able to derive his theory of gravitation and the technology for modifying gravitation. And over the years, I've encountered a lot of different theories. And what I would do is invite you to look at this book, Gravity Control with Present Technology. Mostly it's his writing and I'm just quoting him. I'm trying to put it all in a reasonable logical order in a simple framework and then a much more complex framework. So you can go from, grammar school version to PhD version. If I tried to dump the PhD version on everybody, because I knew there would be readers like you who would understand the mathematics and the physics well enough to critique that, then I would lose every other kind of reader, the lay reader. So I tried to create a kind of a schoolroom version of it, first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade. And that's how I wrote it up. But my answer to your question is, glossing over all the details, and the scientist who has the scalar wave concept was?
Yeah, Tom Bearden.
Okay, I want to look him up, but
Yeah, he recently passed away here.
oh, sorry to hear that. Is he an American scientist?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay, it's got to explain certain facts about gravitation, which are very well known and have been known from the beginning. It's electrically neutral. It is unaffected by electromagnetism. No, electromagnetic fields, no matter how strong, don't seem to have an effect on the gravitational field. Now, you're describing a process where electromagnetic fields cross, have some effect on it. But I'd want to know the mechanism by which they're interfering with gravity. A
Mhm.
critical thinker must look at this and ask themselves, what's the theory of gravity and how does this technology interfere with it? And that's what I would be looking for if I was to read up on Dr. Bearden's technology.
Yeah, well, he gave a lecture back around 2000 that's actually very good, that describes the mathematics behind it.
And it's on YouTube?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I'll look it up.
Yeah, it's a psychotronics lecture back around 2000.
Okay.
Yeah, it is posted on my website,
Oh, you did? What's your website?
intellect.com, INTALEK.com.
Yeah, yeah, and Tom Bearden was a longtime member. I think he was one of the founders of the U.S. Psychotronics Association.
Right.
Way back when. But that would have been Frederick's era. So
Mhm.
Oh,
yeah,
well,
that would have been around the
for all-
era.
for all I know, he knew Tom Bearden. My dad was one of the most antisocial people I have ever known. His sun sign was Cancer, and the crab perfectly depicts his personality. He locked himself away. He didn't want anything to interfere with his work on physics. He must have worked on it 6 hours a day, at least, ever since I became conscious, a conscious human being.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
Yeah, well, more power to him. I was proud of the way, first of all, he kept his wits about him until the very end, and he was 93 years old when he passed away. So I used to go to the University of Oregon every single day and study the latest publications on general relativity and gravitation, and of course, his other interests, optics and heat conduction, and Sommerfeld. So he was always a fun person to talk to. And incidentally, I was promising to do this the last time I was on, but I've made some progress with it. I have 2 lectures on special relativity by my dad, and they're really great. I just haven't transcribed them. And when I transcribe them, I'm going to put them up as a self-published book on Amazon. And if anybody wants to know when that happens, email me at info@claffrackner.com. I'm going to write it here as a message to everybody. And I will send you notice.
Awesome. Okay, well, let's do this. Let's go back to, I want to go to Mark Sokol.
Okay, yes, thank you very much. I'm live here at the ISDC conference. I just wanted to say, David, first of all, about this upcoming book. If you'd like to send me the link to it when it becomes available, maybe we could add it to one of the mailers, because I know what your dad was one of the people who understood the theory of relativity the best.
He did.
He learned it from one of the top students of Einstein himself.
That is true. The man's name was Victor Lenzen. I'll write that down. You can look him up. There's precious little about him online, but they called him a collector of PhDs. And one of those PhDs was in the philosophy of the scientific method. He understood it very well. Even Einstein said himself, nobody understands my theory of relativity better than Victor Lenzen. So that was one of my dad's mentors.
Right. Now getting to experiment we've been working on for the past, it's going on about 2 years now. Unfortunately, I'm at this conference right now, so I'm not able to show you the equipment that the amount of work that we've actually done. I've been updating APEC almost every other week on our work. So far, we've gotten the power to the point where we can heat up the samples, and some of them have gone up in flames. So there's no longer a power issue. The best results that we found so far were with thin film aluminum. And therefore, we were using like a Mylar blanket, like the emergency blankets, because that has thin film already deposited on it. But what we're doing in the coming weeks, we're going to be getting a vacuum vapor deposition machine that will allow us to put different layers of materials and make our own samples, because the equipment is ready, the electromagnet, the RF, everything is ready. The scale system is pretty good.
Wow.
Todd DeCiato, which is one of the members here, is coming down. We're going to be putting a high-speed scale in using an oscilloscope, so we'll be able to see whether the pulses, the weight loss as you graft it, we'll be able to see whether that's happening as well. But the samples and the thin film, I think, is really key to getting the RF to penetrate properly into the sample. Because skin depth at 9.5 gigahertz is pretty low.
And are you committed to 9.5 gigahertz? Or are you able to modulate the frequency?
Oh, we can modulate the frequency and just change the strength of the magnetic field, as necessary. We're not on 9.5 gigahertz. I mean, one of the problems with the X band, for anyone who's played around with it, you'll find that the neural pathways in your brain are nearly perfect antennas for those frequencies. So it can be pretty harrowing if there's any RF radiation leak. You'll start to feel it as in the form of a headache. Me and Jeremiah Pop, when we first started this with just 20 watts, and we put chicken wire all over the place, it didn't help. You can feel the radiation. You'll get a headache. We stuck it inside the Faraday cage and haven't had a problem since. Thank God.
May I just add a footnote on the technology here because of what you said about using a very thin foil sample. Once you set up a dynamic nuclear orientation, you're able to pulse it. The effect should bleed off, the gravitational effect should bleed off into the surroundings because by induction from the oriented material that you're using. And I don't know how far it will extend. It could extend to the entire table. You don't know. You're in the unknown zone. This is what's exciting about doing science. You don't know what kind of an effect, if any, you're going to get. And it might be something very dramatic like that. And well, does that have any practical implication? Yes, it does. The implication is, for example, you could set up a factory floor where you use aluminum wires to conduct the effect to manufacturing robots that with decreased inertia could run 1,000 times faster than they do now, making automobiles or flying saucers or whatever you have them trained to do at an increased rate, at an incredibly increased rate. I mean, it starts your mind working on possibilities undreamed of in science nowadays. And I think I have at least 6 minutes more, so I wanted to mention a couple of things in relation to the technology and its perception and its change on the perception of where we are as a society.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's close out on that. I've got you and Mark open in terms of Mike and then we'll go until 3, and then I believe Ted is here with us, and we'll have him present after that.
Great. Okay. One reason I think a reason of just major importance for pursuing this technology, in spite of its status as an unknown and unproven, like Mark is doing, besides it being an adventure in scientific exploration, it is not without consequences. If the breakthrough is made, then what you're going to see is a transformation of this society, which is currently based on a feeling of scarcity everywhere for natural resources, to a society based on abundance, because resources are abundant in space. You have room to move excess population or expand the human race, the number of places that can be inhabited, into space, into colonies, and to other planets. You can expand industry off the planet and create whole new avenues for the production of anything you might want. And by the way, this is all good for business. This means making money. I think my father estimated that within 8 years of the debut of this technology, the global, I want to say national product, the global GNP of the world, I don't know what the initials are, but that would at least double within 8 years of the debut of this technology. And the way that people live and the way they think of themselves would become a lot, the horizons would expand tremendously. When people go out into space, for example, they come back transformed. It's called the overview effect. And every astronaut has experienced it. You remember William Shatner coming back from his space flight. You can look this up on YouTube. He was deeply moved in a spiritual sense. When millions of people go out into space and experience it as from the view of the Earth from space, will change people forever. I think you're going to see the number of squabbles over scarce resources down here on the planet diminish greatly. And this global move towards fascism will also decline, because that's all based on fear. And what are people afraid of? Oh, I won't have enough gas. I won't have a place to live. I won't have the rent money. Some leader can deliver me from these agonies if I just put all of my trust in that one leader. That kind of an argument will have less traction in a world transformed by this technology. And that's something to be devoutly wished for, because the route that we're going right now is a dangerous one. I can't see any good outcome coming from it. Even these school shootings and things like that, these come from people who lack a purpose in life, and they're victims of this scarcity versus abundance society and culture too. And I think we'll see less of that. So overall, this is going to have a tremendous positive effect on humanity. Now, as for the question of national security, in the congressional hearings, what I heard repeatedly is they're concerned about other countries getting this technology too, or maybe these UAPs represent some other country. I don't think they do. I think they represent an alien technology, but that's only my opinion. The reason I wrote the book was so that I would point out that other countries have been looking for scientific publications inside the United States to rip off technology, which means this technology has been out there for 38 years. 38 years it has been in the public domain. Anybody could have taken it and run with it, and that wouldn't be necessarily a good thing for the United States. Those of you who are old enough to remember will remember the Sputnik scandal and chaos that ensued when Russia launched a satellite around the globe. And am I still on? Am I still on?
Yeah.
Tim?
No, you're still here. You're still here.
Yeah, my screen changed. I just, if you don't know about Sputnik, look it up. It was it's stimulated a lot of change in the United States, because we were scared that the Russians would get into space or go to the moon or develop some means of attacking the United States because they had space technology. Now, I hate to think what it would be like if a foreign country read up on my father's papers sometime in the past 40 years and came up with the technology that the universities in the United States were so intent on ignoring because it was in the public domain. And that's one reason I put it out there, because we really should prove it or disprove it and discard it. If we prove it out, it will be an engine for progress, and nobody's going to get ahead of anybody else. The development of this technology is going to be like the development of aviation technology. In the beginning, it was the Wright brothers, and then next thing you knew, the military had uses for it, and commercial aviation, and there are all kinds of branches on the aviation services. And that's what's going to happen with this technology too, including, as I believe, private anti-gravity vehicles uses commuter craft. And there's a description of that in a top 10 UFO riddles, possibly in the other book too. I'm not sure. But anyway, the description of somebody living on a mountaintop in Colorado and commuting to Los Angeles. What would it be like? But actually millions of people could be doing this because these vehicles are not expensive to create. You could even install a pack, inertial modification pack on an automobile and increase the mileage. The ways you can deploy the technology are unlimited, but nobody can imagine it now because they don't know what it can do. And it has to start somewhere. And the purpose of my books was to urge it to get started in this country so that once again, we could be out in front of the curve if it actually works. There you go.
Wonderful.
That's my thoughts on the matter.
David, thank you so much. That is an excellent statement to close on. I'm going to put this thing back on gallery view. Everyone, please give again an enormous applause for David Alzofon. Wonderful. And yeah, again, I would urge everyone to check out Gravity Control with Present Technologies and to look up yourself, David Alzofon, and your father, Frederick Alzofon. I mean, you guys, the work that you did, that was an inspiration for so much of what Mark's team is doing right now. So it's incredibly relevant. And again, thank you for being part of this conference since like the very beginning. So
thank you very much, Tim.
okay, so what I would like to do now is, let me see. I'm going to ask Ted, I believe this is the correct Ted, to unmute. Ted?
Can you hear me?
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Sir,
Okay.
welcome.
Welcome. Hang on just 1 second. I had to get the charger for my computer. It was getting low. It'll take me 30 seconds.
Sure thing. Well, Ted, let me put you back on mute and I'm going to do an introduction as well. I'll do a brief introduction.
Okay.
You guys believe in bio breaks or stretch breaks or anything?
Sorry. Well, I kind of take them while people are presenting. But it's going to take me just a moment. I do have him scheduled for 3 though, so I should probably start now. But let me do the introduction.
Okay.
Okay, sorry about that. So we have with us Ted Pittman.